Montana Territory, 1882. The wind cut sharp across the open prairie as Marabeth Turner staggered through the snow-dusted field, her arms aching from the weight of 2 crying infants tucked against her chest. She gritted her teeth and pressed forward, the hem of her dress soaked through from melted frost. Her boots slipped in the mud, but she did not fall. She could not fall. Not while the twins were still breathing. She had nothing but the babies, a thin shawl, and the memory of a slammed door from 3 nights ago. "You brought shame on this family," her father had said, his voice like stone. "No name on the birth papers, no husband. You're not welcome here, Marabeth." He had not even looked at the children, just turned his back and walked inside. Now she was alone. 22 years old, disowned, and dragging herself across unfamiliar land with no clear direction. The twins, Susanna and Samuel, whimpered against her chest. They were only a week old. Cold crept into her bones. Her legs buckled, then held. She squinted into the distance. Smoke. A curl of it, faint but real, rising above the hills. A ranch, maybe? Or a trapper's cabin? She did not care. It was shelter. She pushed forward, her breath raw and ragged. The world swam in and out of focus. The babies had gone quiet. That terrified her most. Then, through the haze, a figure on horseback emerged. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with a dark brown coat flapping in the wind. His hat shadowed his face, but when he saw her, he pulled hard on the reins and jumped down. "Ma'am?" he called, jogging closer. "Are you all right?" Marabeth tried to answer, but her knees gave way. She dropped to the ground, shielding the twins with her arms. The man reached her in 3 long strides. Hey, I've got you." He knelt beside her, his voice steady. "I'm not going to hurt you." She blinked up at him. He looked about her age, maybe a year older. His eyes were a soft, steady brown. His jaw was dusted with stubble, and there was mud on his boots. He smelled like leather and firewood. "The babies," she whispered. "Please." He did not hesitate. He peeled back the shawl, checked both children quickly, and nodded. "They're breathing." "You did good keeping them warm." Her vision blurred again. "I do not know where to go." "You do now," he said, already pulling off his coat. "Come on. Let's get them and you warm." "What is your name?" she asked weakly. "Lachlan Boone," he replied as he wrapped the coat around her. "You can call me Locke." He lifted her like she weighed nothing. The babies stayed tucked against her chest. She let her cheek rest against his shoulder, and for the first time in days the tension in her chest loosened just a little. Lachlan's ranch was a mile down the road, tucked between a grove of bare cottonwoods. He carried her into the small but warm cabin, set her gently on the cot near the fire, and hurried to heat water. Marabeth watched him move. Everything he did was careful, efficient, but always with a glance back at her and the twins. He brought her tea, wrapped the babies in soft quilts, and stoked the flames higher. When she finally started to warm, she sat up straighter. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said, crouching beside her. "You were freezing, carrying 2 babies, and still walking." "That tells me everything I need to know." She stared at him. "I was disowned. My father says I am a disgrace." Lachlan's jaw tightened. "Sounds like your father is a fool." She blinked, not expecting that answer. He looked at the babies, now asleep by the fire. "What are their names?" "Susanna and Samuel." "They are beautiful," he said, his voice softer now. "You kept them alive through all this. That takes grit." Marabeth swallowed hard. "I had nowhere else to go." "You do now," he said simply. She stared at him again. "Why are you helping me?" He did not answer right away. He just pushed a loose curl from her cheek, his fingers gentle. "No one should be thrown away for loving their children." Her throat tightened. "You can stay here," he added. "As long as you need to. I do not want charity." He smiled, but it was kind. "Good. Because I am not offering charity. What are you offering then? He stood and glanced at the babies. A place. A safe one. For you and them. That is all. She looked at the fire, her hands folded tight in her lap. I do not know how to trust that. Lachlan sat beside her again, not touching her, just close enough to share the warmth. You do not have to trust it today. Just rest. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Marabeth looked at him again. Really looked. His eyes were calm and steady. He had not asked anything of her. He had not judged her. And when she had fallen, he had caught her. The silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. Thank you, she said quietly. He dipped his head. You are welcome. That night, with the fire crackling low and the twins asleep between them on a folded blanket, Lachlan sat in the rocking chair and kept watch while Marabeth slept. Every time one of the babies stirred, he was there. When Samuel whimpered, Lachlan lifted him carefully and rocked him until he settled again. When Marabeth opened her eyes in the early hours before dawn, Lachlan was still there, quiet, steady, and watching over all three of them. She stared at him, something warm and unfamiliar pressing against her ribs. She had no name, no place, and no future when she first crossed that field. But now, in this quiet cabin with the smell of woodsmoke and the gentle breathing of her children, her heart whispered something she had not dared to believe in days. Hope. Morning settled over the prairie in a wash of pale gold, filtering through the cabin's single window. The wood stove crackled low, its warmth still holding in the corners of the room. Marabeth sat at the table, hair loosely braided, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her hands moved slowly over a piece of mending one of Lachlan's shirts, torn clean across the shoulder seam. She hadn't asked to help, but when she saw the pile of threadbare garments by the wash basin, something in her stirred a need to do, to contribute, to belong. Lachlan came in from the barn, shaking snow from his shoulders. His coat hung open, and his breath still fogged the air. They're fed, he said, nodding toward the back room. Both sleeping again. She hadn't needed to ask. He'd already settled into a rhythm with them, moving quiet and sure, as if he'd always known how to care for newborns. She folded another stitch and didn't lift her gaze. I hope you don't mind, she said, voice low. The seam was fraying. Appreciate it. He hung his hat on the peg beside the door. She paused, then set the shirt aside. Does anyone else live out here? Nearest neighbors 4 miles east, retired Army scout and his wife. Don't see them much in winter. He poured water into the tin basin, rubbed his hands clean with lye soap. Used to be more folks, but the hard frost 2 years back pushed most toward Helena. Her eyes flickered. Is that where you came from? No. Grew up south of here. Bitterroot Valley. He dried his hands on a rag. Father passed 5 winters ago. Mother before that. I came north for space. Marabeth nodded. Do you ever miss people? He leaned a hip against the table. Sometimes. But I don't mind quiet. She studied his face. You're not much older than me. Most men your age are married already. His mouth tugged slightly at one corner, not a grin, just acknowledgement. Didn't find the right reason. I wasn't about to marry just because it was expected. Marabeth looked down at her hands. That's rare. I figure life's hard enough without tying yourself to someone you can't talk to at the end of the day. She pressed her thumb to the edge of the table. I was promised once. He left when I told him I was carrying. Lachlan didn't flinch. That his handwriting on the birth record? No. I never saw him again. I didn't want his name on anything. He was quiet a moment, then said, You did right. She exhaled slowly. I wasn't sure for a long time. You are now? Yes. The baby stirred faintly in the other room. Lachlan stepped back toward the stove. You can keep mending if you like. Or rest. I've got to check the fence line before the snow deepens. She stood. I can help. He paused, one hand on his coat. You just gave birth. I've worked stock before. My uncle raised sheep. I can hold a post or carry wire. He studied her, then nodded. You'll need warmer boots. She changed quickly, wrapping the twins in thick quilts and placing them in the wicker cradle near the hearth. Lachlan watched her tuck them in, his gaze resting on the way her hand lingered on Susanna's cheek before she turned away. They walked the ridge in silence. The fence sagged in places where elk had pushed through. Marabeth held the coil of wire while Lachlan hammered staples. The wind bit through their sleeves, and her fingers numbed, but she didn't complain. At the third break, she handed him the wire and said, "You don't speak much." He glanced sideways. "Never saw the use in words that didn't matter. I like that." He gave her a look that held no judgment, only quiet interest. "What did you want before all this?" She hesitated. "I wanted to teach children. Letters, numbers. I had a mind for books. Still could if you wanted." She shook her head. "Not now. Not with 2 babies and no husband." Lachlan hammered another staple, then straightened. "You've got more grit than most. Don't let anyone take that from you." She looked at him fully then, the winter sun catching in her eyes. "You don't talk like other men I've known. Maybe I never learned how." They walked back as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the land. Inside, the twins were still asleep, their tiny breaths misting in the warm air. Lachlan lit the oil lamp and handed her a bowl of stew. They ate at the table, side by side, not speaking much, just the soft clink of spoons and the low whistle of wind through the eaves. After they finished, he stood and said, "If you're staying, you'll need your own space. I can clear the loft." She met his gaze. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." Her throat tightened. She looked away. "I forgot what kindness felt like." He didn't move, didn't reach for her. Just said, quiet and steady, "You'll remember." And somehow, that was more comforting than any embrace. The first thaw came slowly. Not in any grand way, no sudden melt or bursting creak, but in the subtler signs. The way the snow no longer crunched but gave softly underfoot, the faint drip of meltwater from the eaves, the occasional chirp of a bird testing its voice. It was mid-March, and the land still wore winter's weight, but the edges had begun to loosen. Marabeth stood at the edge of the paddock, her shawl fastened tight, watching Lachlan work with a bay gelding that had a habit of balking at the saddle. He moved with unhurried precision, his voice low and even as he guided the horse in a slow circle. The animal's ears twitched, but it followed. She had taken to rising early, before the twins stirred, to walk the perimeter of the property. It gave her a sense of boundary, of shape. Something she could hold on to. Today, though, she lingered near the barn, her fingers curled around the fence rail. "You break all your horses that gentle?" she asked once the gelding had stilled. Lachlan turned. "Every one that lets me." She stepped closer. "Seems like more patience than most men have. Doesn't do much good to rush something that's scared." He led the horse toward the post, tying the reins. When he looked at her again, there was a trace of something behind his eyes, concern, maybe. "You didn't come outside yesterday." "I didn't feel right," she said. "Just tired." He nodded, not pressing. "The babies?" "They're fine." Samuel's eyes are starting to track movement. "They're alert, both of them." He studied her a moment longer, then said, "You ever ride?" "I rode side saddle on Sundays. And bareback when no one was looking." That caught a flicker of amusement in his gaze. "I could rig a gentler pony. Something steady." She hesitated. "You trust me with that? I've seen you handle worse." As she followed him into the barn, the scent of hay and horses wrapped around her. He let out a strawberry roan with soft eyes and a slow gait. "She's older," he said, offering the reins. "But she won't take off on you." Marabeth rested her hand on the mare's shoulder, smiling faintly at the warmth under her palm. "I don't think I've smiled in a month," she said. Lachlan didn't respond, just watched her mount with quiet attention. When she was settled, he adjusted the stirrup length, his hand brushing her boot. Not deliberately. But not by accident either. She rode the mare down the lower trail, following the edge of the creek, breathing in the scent of thawed earth. When she returned, he was splitting wood by the lean-to, sleeves rolled to the elbow, his shirt damp at the collar. She dismounted and tied the reins to the hitch post. "I'd forgotten what it felt like," she said. "To move without being afraid." Lachlan set the axe aside. "You've got nothing to run from here." "I know," she said. "But it takes time to believe it." That night, after the twins were asleep and the cabin had gone still, she found him on the porch, a tin cup in one hand, his boots resting on the rail. The sky was clear, stars sharp above the black tree line. She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders and sat beside him. "I keep thinking about what comes next," she said after a while. He didn't turn to look at her. "You've got a place here." "I know. But I don't want to take without giving back." "You're raising 2 children. That's not nothing." "I want to be more than someone you helped," she said softly. "I want to carry my own weight." He leaned forward, setting the cup down between his boots. "Then let's build something." She looked at him, unsure what he meant. "I've got land that needs tending. There's room for more hands. And if you want to teach, there's a few ranch families east of here. Kids that never stepped foot in a schoolhouse. You'd let me start something like that?" "Not let," he said, finally turning toward her. "I'd help." The quiet between them stretched, not empty, but waiting. Then she reached for his hand, resting it lightly over his fingers on the rail. "I didn't think I'd ever trust a man again." "You don't have to yet," he said. "Just sit with me a while." She did. Until the stars wheeled west and the cold settled deeper into the bones of the house. Her hand stayed in his the whole time. Either of them let go. Inside, the cradle creaked as Samuel stirred. Marabeth rose, but Lachlan stood first. "I'll get him," he said gently. She watched him go, her chest full of something she no longer feared to name. The prairie had softened in the weeks since the thaw began, and now the land gave off the scent of damp earth and new grass. The air held warmth for the first time in months, not just in the sunlight, but in the wind itself. Marabeth sat on the cabin step with Susanna tucked against her chest and Samuel dozing nearby in a cedarwood cradle Lachlan had carved from a fallen tree along the north fence line. He'd worked on it in the evenings after supper, smoothing each edge until it rocked without a sound. She shifted the baby in her arms and watched Lachlan's string wire across the new paddock. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, and his hat sat low, shadowing his face as he worked. She'd learned his patterns by now, the way he always tested each post twice before moving on, how he paused to watch the horizon when the wind picked up. "Lach," she called, careful not to raise her voice too much and wake Samuel. "Just how many acres does this place stretch?" He set the spool of wire down and pushed his head up. "Close to 200. Most of it's pasture, some pine up near the ridge." "Why?" She brushed a curl behind her ear. "I was counting fence posts. Thought it must be more than I guessed." "You thinking of running your own herd?" he asked, walking back toward her. "I'd say you've got the look of someone planning something." She stood, holding Susanna close. "I've been thinking about building a garden. Not just a kitchen plot, but something sizable. Enough to trade with a few folks come fall." He stopped at the edge of the porch. "You'd want to work that yourself?" "I'd rather not wait for someone to offer me a place in town, if that's what you're asking." He leaned one hand on the porch rail. "I wasn't asking anything. I just like hearing you talk like that. Like you see yourself here." She looked down at Susanna's sleeping face. "I've started to." They both turned at the sound of hoofbeats. A wagon approached from the east trail, drawn by a swayback mule and driven by a woman with a wide straw hat and gloved hands. Marabeth narrowed her eyes, shielding them from the sun. "That's Mrs. Finley," Lachlan said. "She's the one I mentioned who keeps chickens and makes soap." The wagon rolled to a stop, and the woman climbed down with surprising ease for someone of her age. Her eyes darted toward the cradle and then to Marabeth. "You're the girl who came out of the snow," she said, not unkindly. "I heard talk, but I don't hold much stock in what passes for news out here." Marabeth tightened her grip on Susanna. "I suppose I am." Mrs. Finley stepped closer, peering at the baby's sleeping face. "She's got strong lungs, I'll wager. You feed in them yourself?" "I am." "Good. Don't let anyone tell you to do different." She turned to Lachlan. "I brought what you asked for: cloth, milk powder, and that bolt of muslin." He helped unload the supplies while Marabeth laid Susanna back in the cradle. When Mrs. Finley handed her the muslin, she ran a thumb across its weave. "I didn't ask for this." "No, but he did," the older woman said, nodding toward Lachlan. "Said you'd be needing it for baby clothes. And maybe something of your own." Lachlan returned with a crate of eggs and a wrapped bundle. "Trade's fair." Mrs. Finley glanced between them, a knowing look settling in her eyes. "You got yourself a good one here, girl. Don't let folks' talk make you forget it." Marabeth's breath caught slightly. "They're not his." "They are now," the woman said, matter of fact. "That's plain." After she left, the sound of the wagon faded into the hills. Marabeth ran her fingers over the muslin again. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," Lachlan replied. "But you've been stitching everything out of scrap. Figured you deserved better." She turned to face him. "You keep doing things that make it harder not to feel settled." He didn't move closer, just stood there with his hands at his sides, watching her like he was waiting for something important. "I don't want to be someone you carry out of guilt," she said softly. "You're not. I'm not sure what this is. It's whatever you want it to be. But I'll tell you what I want." She held his gaze, heart thudding. "I want to build something that holds," he said. "Not out of obligation. Because I want you here." He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, and reached for her hand. His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist, not rushed, just warm and steady. "I'm not afraid of the weight you carry," he said. "I want to carry it with you." Marabeth looked down at their joined hands. Then at the babies nestled together in the cradle. And then at the wide stretch of land beyond the porch, waiting for what came next. "Then stay," she whispered. "I already have." He leaned in, and she met him halfway. There was no urgency in the kiss, just the quiet confirmation of something that had already taken root and begun to grow. Behind them, Samuel stirred, letting out a faint cry. Marabeth pulled back, smiling as she turned toward the cradle. Lachlan followed, crouching beside her. Together they lifted the twins, one into each arm, their bodies close, the warmth of the fire behind them and the slow, steady rhythm of 4 heartbeats becoming one. Neither of them said another word. They didn't need to. By the time spring settled fully, the cabin no longer felt like borrowed shelter. Marabeth had planted her rows early peas, squash, onions, and a patch of chamomile along the southern wall where the sun lingered long into evening. The soil was stubborn, but she worked it loose with a hand hoe and grit, her skirts hiked up to the knee and her back aching by sundown. Lachlan had brought in a second milk goat from a rancher due west, and when Marabeth heard his boots on the porch that evening and saw the soft-eyed creature tethered behind him, she blinked in disbelief. "I didn't trade for her," he said. "She was born late last season runt, mostly overlooked. The man said she'd be happier somewhere quiet." Marabeth brushed the goat's ears gently. "So you brought her to me. I figured you'd see her worth." That night, she stitched her initials into a linen square and nailed it to the barn door, just under the eaves where the wind wouldn't catch it. She didn't say anything about it, but Lachlan noticed the next morning and didn't ask. He only stepped slightly out of his usual path to touch it once with his thumb before going back to work. The twins had begun to laugh real, gurgling sounds that lifted out of their throats like music. Susanna caught hold of her own foot one afternoon, and looked at it like it was the first wonder of the world. Samuel, always the quieter of the two, had taken to staring at Lachlan with furrowed brows, as if puzzling out some great truth. They shared the loft now. Lachlan had carved a second cradle, this one lower and broader, so the babies could sleep side by side. Marabeth's clothes hung beside his shirts on the pegboard, her comb rested next to his shaving brush, and her boots stood just beneath the windowsill, where she always kicked them off before climbing into bed. One night in late April, she sat brushing out her hair by lantern light, the children fast asleep. Lachlan leaned back against the headboard, watching the flicker of light move through the strands. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if none of this had happened?" she asked. "I'd probably still be fixing fence and talking more to my horse than people." She smiled faintly. "And I'd be in a boarding house somewhere, trying to convince a school board I was respectable." "You are. Not to them." He reached for her brush. "Turn around." She did, and he began to stroke it through her hair in long, careful movements. "Does it bother you?" she asked after a while. "That I didn't come to you without history?" He rested the brush in his lap. "What you carried in doesn't matter to me. What you built with it does." She turned to face him. "I've never belonged anywhere." "Not truly." "You do now." There was no pause in him when he said it. No hesitation. And she believed him. The next week, they were married on a clear afternoon with the twins bundled in a quilt and Mrs. Finley standing as witness. The preacher from the mining camp rode in on a gray mare and read from a small, worn Bible. Lachlan's voice was low and steady when he spoke his vows. Marabeth's hand didn't tremble when she placed hers in his. They held a supper afterward, just the five of them, with bread she had baked that morning and wild greens gathered from the ridge. The babies slept on a pallet in the corner, while the adults drank warm cider and laughed quietly about things that no longer hurt. That night, with the door bolted and the fire low, Marabeth lay beside him, tracing circles on his chest with her fingertips. "I didn't know a man could feel like shelter," she whispered. He pulled her closer. "You're my home, too." Years passed quietly. The garden grew. The twins learned to walk, then run, then ask questions faster than answers could follow. Marabeth taught letters to a handful of ranch children on Thursdays beneath the cottonwood near the creek. Lachlan built a second room onto the cabin with a wide window that opened toward the sunrise. They bickered sometimes over which field to seed next or how many hens to keep, but it always ended with a touch, a shared look, the kind of silence that needed no apology. And one late summer evening, when the air smelled of wheat and the sky burned gold, Marabeth stood at the edge of the field, her hand on her belly, and smiled before she turned toward the porch where Lachlan rocked Samuel's old cradle, ready to begin again. She had crossed into this life with nothing but the weight of her children in her arms. Now she held the shape of a future fully hers, a quiet house, a strong man, and love that had been earned, not given. She never walked alone again.